Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, An Academic Invitation. Hercule Poirot disliked disorder, yet he found himself strangely fond of railway journeys. The timetables pleased him, the measured rhythm of stations arriving and departing reassured him that the world, despite appearances, could still be governed by rules. On this particular morning, as the train slowed into the small station serving St. Aldwyn's University, Poirot observed with satisfaction that it arrived precisely 2 minutes early, a courtesy he appreciated. He stepped down onto the platform, immaculately dressed, his coat brushed, his shoes gleaming faintly despite the damp autumn air. The season had painted the countryside in muted golds and browns, and a light mist lingered as though reluctant to leave. Poirot inhaled deeply. "Ah," he murmured, "the scent of learning, and of secrets." A car awaited him, driven by a young porter whose nervous enthusiasm suggested that Poirot's reputation had preceded him. As they approached the university grounds, the detective studied his surroundings carefully. St. Aldwyn's was old, proud, and severe in its beauty. Tall stone buildings rose with quiet authority, their windows watching the courtyards like unblinking eyes. The lawns were clipped to perfection, gravel paths carefully raked. Order everywhere, yet Poirot knew too well that such order often concealed profound disturbance. He was received in the Vice-Chancellor's office by Professor Lionel Brooke, a man of polished manners and reassuring voice. Brooke rose at once, extending his hand with practiced warmth. "Monsieur Poirot, it is a great honor," he said. "We are most grateful you came on such short notice." Poirot bowed slightly. "When a gentleman writes that discretion is essential, I pay attention. And when he adds urgency, I pack my suitcase immediately." Brooke smiled, though his eyes flickered with something Poirot noted carefully, impatience, perhaps, or anxiety carefully suppressed. Saturday. Tea was served. The office itself was immaculate, yet curiously impersonal, as though nothing within it truly belonged to its occupant. "You wrote of a concern," Poirot prompted gently. Brooke folded his hands. "St. Aldwyn's is on the brink of great distinction. Our Department of Cognitive Sciences has recently been awarded the Meridian Research Grant, a sum that will secure our future for decades." Poirot nodded. "Money," he said softly, "is rarely a quiet companion." Brooke hesitated. "There have been tensions. Rivalries. I fear matters may escalate." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Escalate to what, precisely?" Before Brooke could reply, a sound pierced the calm of the office. A scream, sharp, desperate, unmistakably human, echoed across the quadrangle below. For a moment, neither man moved. Poirot was the first to rise. "That," he said calmly, "was not academic debate." They hurried from the office and down the stone stairs. Students gathered in confused clusters, voices overlapping, fear spreading with remarkable speed. A young woman stood shaking near the entrance of the philosophy building, her hands pressed to her mouth. He's dead," she whispered. "Dr. Felton." Poirot entered the building quietly. The philosophy seminar room lay at the end of a narrow corridor. Its door was closed. Inside, the air was unnaturally still. Dr. Adrian Felton lay on the floor beside his desk, his body twisted awkwardly, his spectacles broken nearby. A heavy brass paperweight, engraved with the university crest, rested beside his head, stained dark. Poirot took in the scene with extraordinary calm. The furniture was neatly arranged. No papers scattered. No sign of a struggle. The window was closed. The curtains half drawn. The wall clock had stopped. "Curious," Poirot murmured. The porter hovered nervously. The door, it was locked, sir. From the inside. Poirot glanced at the lock, then at the body, then once more at the orderly room. A locked door, he said. How reassuring. And how misleading. Footsteps approached. A man of solid build entered briskly, introducing himself as Inspector Howard Mills. His eyes flicked from the body to Poirot with immediate recognition. Well, Mills said, exhaling slowly, I can't say I'm displeased to see you here. Poirot inclined his head politely. Mills briefed him quickly. 5 people had been in the building at the time. No one had seen or heard anything unusual before the scream. Dr. Felton had been working late, as was his habit. Poirot listened, saying little. Instead, he observed. He noticed the chair near the door, pulled slightly out of alignment. He noticed the stopped clock, frozen at precisely 6:40. He noticed Felton's wristwatch, partially hidden beneath his sleeve. Poirot bent slightly to examine it. 6:22. Inspector, Poirot said quietly, do you believe time always agrees with itself? Mills frowned. I'd like to think so. Poirot straightened. Then we must investigate why, in this room, it does not. Outside, the university bells began to toll the hour. Their sound rolled across the stone buildings, solemn and measured. Poirot gazed around the room one final time. In a place devoted to the mind, he said softly, it is fitting that the crime, too, should be one of intellect rather than impulse. He adjusted his moustache with delicate precision. And I assure you, Inspector, the mind that planned this believed itself very clever indeed. The game, Poirot knew, had begun. Chapter 2, The Circle of Scholars. The first duty of the living, Inspector Mills observed grimly, was paperwork. The body had been removed, the philosophy seminar room sealed, and the immediate shock of discovery had begun to give way to curiosity, fear, and speculation. St. Aldwyn's University, so accustomed to quiet certainty, now trembled beneath the weight of a single violent act. Poirot remained calm. He seated himself in a small antechamber adjacent to the seminar room, selecting a chair with care before settling his hat neatly upon his knee. One by one, those known to have been in the building were invited to speak with him. Inspector Mills stood nearby, notebook in hand. We'll start with the Vice-Chancellor, he said. Professor Lionel Brooke entered with measured composure. His face bore an expression of dignified concern, yet his posture remained upright, his gestures restrained. He sat without being asked. A dreadful business, Brooke began. Dr. Felton was a gifted man. A difficult man, perhaps, but gifted. Poirot regarded him kindly. Difficult men, he said, often create simple enemies and complex ones. Brooke smiled faintly. If you suggest motive, Monsieur Poirot, I fear you will find many. That is precisely my expectation, Poirot replied. Brooke explained that he had left the building shortly before 6 to attend a donor's dinner. Several witnesses could confirm this. He had heard nothing until the scream echoed across the quadrangle. Poirot thanked him. Brooke departed with careful dignity. The man is polished, Mills remarked. Indeed, Poirot agreed. Polish is most effective when applied daily. Next came Dr. Clara Winslow. She entered briskly, her expression cool, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She did not sit immediately, but stood as though prepared to leave at any moment. You worked closely with Dr. Felton, Mills began. Closely, Winslow said, but not comfortably. Poirot inclined his head. Professional rivalry, perhaps. She exhaled sharply. Felton had a habit of presenting shared research as personal triumph. He was brilliant, yes, but not generous. She admitted to having argued with him that afternoon over the direction of the Meridian project. However, she insisted she had left the building before 6. Poirot watched her carefully. Her eyes were dry. Her voice controlled. Grief, he reflected silently, does not always announce itself with tears. When she left, Mills frowned. She had reason enough. Poirot smiled faintly. So did nearly everyone, Inspector. Marcus Hale arrived next. Young, intelligent, and visibly agitated, he paced rather than Saturday. They'll blame me, he said at once. Because I shouted. Because I challenged him. Poirot gestured gently for him to sit. Tell me about the challenge. Hale explained that Felton had dismissed his latest research findings without review. Worse, he had threatened to remove Hale from the Meridian project altogether. I was angry, Hale admitted. But murder? No. I left the building before him. Poirot nodded. Anger, he said, is loud. Planning is silent. Hale paused, unsettled by the remark. Next came Professor Edwin Marsh, whose disdain was barely concealed. This university has become obsessed with novelty, Marsh declared. Felton's work was fashionable nonsense. Yet you remained for the evening, Poirot observed. I had a lecture to prepare, Marsh replied stiffly. I saw no one. Heard nothing. Poirot studied the man's rigid posture, his clenched jaw. A man of principles, he thought. Principles, too, can kill. Finally, Eleanor Price, the departmental administrator, entered quietly. She closed the door behind her with care. I manage schedules and access, she explained softly. That is all. She confirmed she had been working late. She had heard the scream. She had fetched help. Poirot noticed her hands were steady. Too steady. When she left, the room felt emptier. Mills sighed. 5 suspects. 5 motives. Poirot leaned back, steepling his fingers. No, he said. 5 personalities. Motive is merely the echo of character. They returned briefly to the seminar room. Poirot walked its perimeter slowly. Inspector, he said, you believe the door was locked from the inside? Yes. Excellent. And do you believe the scream marked the moment of death? Mills hesitated. That's the assumption. Poirot gestured to the stopped clock. Assumptions are convenient. Truth rarely is. He pointed to the chair near the door. Moved after death. He indicated the desk. Nothing disturbed. This was not rage, Poirot continued. It was correction. Mills looked thoughtful. Outside, whispers filled the corridors. Students speculated. Faculty avoided one another's gaze. Poirot observed it all from a distance. Universities, he mused aloud, teach the mind to question everything, except itself. As evening fell, the bells rang once more. Poirot stood. The circle is complete, Inspector, he said. Now we must disturb it. And somewhere within the ancient walls of St. Aldwyn's, a murderer listened, and waited. Chapter 3, False Certainties. By the following morning, St. Aldwyn's University had settled into a peculiar imitation of normality. Lectures resumed, bells rang on schedule, and students hurried along the stone paths with books pressed to their chests. Yet beneath this surface rhythm lay unease, as though the ancient buildings themselves were holding their breath. Poirot observed the scene from a bench in the quadrangle, his gloved hands folded neatly over his cane. He disliked haste in investigations. Truth, he believed, emerged best when allowed to reveal its inconsistencies. Inspector Mills joined him, carrying a folded report. The preliminary medical findings are in, Mills said. Cause of death, a single blow to the head. Almost certainly fatal within minutes. Poirot nodded. Almost, he repeated softly. An interesting word. They walked together toward the philosophy building. Along the way, Poirot asked about witness statements, movements, and times. Each answer he received seemed satisfactory on its own, and yet, when placed beside the others, they refused to align. Too neat, Poirot remarked. Mills glanced at him. Most people would welcome neatness. Indeed. But crime rarely cooperates. Inside the sealed seminar room, Poirot requested a final, uninterrupted examination. Mills agreed. The detective moved slowly, his eyes absorbing every detail. The desk. The chair. The shelf of journals, carefully ordered by subject rather than date. The stopped clock still hung upon the wall, untouched since the previous evening. Poirot checked the clock mechanism. A simple jolt would suffice to halt it. Deliberate, he murmured. He examined the window next. The latch was intact. No sign of forced entry. A locked room, Poirot said aloud. So comforting. It reassures us that the impossible has occurred, when in fact, something far simpler has been overlooked. He knelt briefly to inspect the floor. There, faintly visible in the grain of the wood, were two overlapping scuff marks near the door. One man, Poirot said, stood here. Another moved later. He straightened, satisfied. Outside, the university hummed with rumor. Marcus Hale had been seen pacing late into the night. Dr. Winslow had cancelled her lectures abruptly. Professor Marsh had been overheard condemning the investigation as a distraction. Eleanor Price remained at her desk, answering questions with quiet efficiency. Each detail was offered freely. Too freely. Poirot decided it was time to listen to the university itself. He attended a public lecture that afternoon, sitting quietly at the back. As he watched the students, he noted their glances toward the philosophy building, their whispered speculations. A murder, he reflected, reveals more about the living than the dead. After the lecture, Poirot sought out Marcus Hale. The young man looked exhausted. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. You did not sleep, Poirot observed gently. How could I? Hale replied. Everyone thinks I did it. Do they? Poirot asked. Or do you think they do? Hale faltered. Poirot asked him to recount, once more, the events of the previous evening. Hale obliged, his voice quickening as he spoke. You left the building before 6, Poirot repeated. Yet the porter recalls seeing you near the philosophy corridor at past. Hale stiffened. That's impossible. Is it? Poirot asked calmly. Memory is a cooperative thing, it often tells us what we wish to hear. Hale shook his head. I went back for my notebook, he admitted. But I didn't see Felton. Poirot smiled kindly. Thank you for your honesty. That evening, Poirot spoke with Dr. Winslow again. She stood by her office window, arms crossed. You were calm yesterday, Poirot remarked. I had prepared myself, she said coldly. Felton was not an easy colleague. Poirot tilted his head. Prepared for his death. For conflict, she corrected sharply. Poirot noticed her fingers tighten at the window frame. Tell me, he said, did Dr. Felton make changes to the Meridian project recently? Her eyes flickered. That is administrative business. Administrative business often kills, Poirot replied mildly. She turned away. Later still, Poirot encountered Professor Marsh in the library. You despise Dr. Felton's work, Poirot said. I despised its dishonesty, Marsh replied. Yet dishonesty alone does not compel murder. Marsh's lips thinned. You underestimate the damage of corrupted thought. Poirot studied him. On the contrary, I fear you may overestimate it. Finally, Poirot sought Eleanor Price. She was alone in the administrative office, filing documents with meticulous care. You manage schedules, Poirot said. Keys. Access. She nodded. Order, Poirot continued, is your profession. Yes. Disorder troubles you. She paused, just briefly. Everyone is troubled, she said. Poirot smiled. As night fell once more over St. Aldwyn's, Inspector Mills found Poirot standing beneath the clock tower. You have theories, Mills said. I have contradictions, Poirot replied. Which are far more useful. The stopped clock above them struck no hour. Inspector, Poirot said quietly, when a crime appears perfect, it is because we are asking the wrong questions. Somewhere within the university, a certainty was crumbling. And the truth waited patiently, unconcerned with time. Chapter 4, The Grant That Divides. The morning after the murder, a pall of unease hung over St. Aldwyn's University. The students moved silently between their lectures, their footsteps echoing unnaturally across the ancient stone corridors. Even the usually boisterous voices of the science labs were hushed. Rumors spread as quickly as the leaves drifting along the quadrangle, each whispered theory more elaborate than the last. Yet, Poirot found fascination not in the panic but in the human reactions it produced. He arrived in the Department of Cognitive Sciences, his cane tapping softly against the floor. The office of Professor Lionel Brooke was tidy as ever, the blinds drawn to control the early light. Brooke greeted him with restrained composure, though his usual polish seemed slightly dulled by tension. Monsieur Poirot, Brooke said, gesturing for him to sit, we have tried to maintain the work schedule, though the incident has unsettled everyone. Still, the Meridian grant remains at the center of much speculation. Poirot inclined his head. Indeed. Tell me, Professor, what can you share about the grant itself? Brooke sighed. It is the largest sum the university has ever received. £10 million, intended to fund research for the next 5 years. Yet disputes over its allocation have created rifts in the department. Felton, he believed that some researchers were undeserving, myself included, in certain decisions he thought corrupt. Poirot leaned forward, hands steepled. And who, precisely, would benefit most from a change in the allocation? Brooke hesitated. Felton had influence. Alterations to the grant proposal could elevate some names, diminish others. It was a source of tension, yes. But murder should not be discussed in terms of scholarship, monsieur. Poirot smiled thinly. Murder is never absent from ambition. It merely disguises itself under civility. Later, Poirot made his way to Dr. Clara Winslow's laboratory. The room smelled faintly of solvents and ink. Winslow was at her desk, examining research notes, yet her eyes flickered toward Poirot as he entered. Dr. Winslow, he said, I am interested in the Meridian Project's recent adjustments. She stiffened. They were minor, administrative. Felton insisted on changes that reflected his own judgment. And did anyone gain from these changes? Poirot asked gently. Winslow's fingers tightened on her pen. Some gained recognition. Others, perhaps the illusion of progress. Poirot noticed the slight quiver of her hand, almost imperceptible. Recognition, madam, is often coveted more than money. Yes, she said quietly. And jealousy can be very sharp. He did not press further, but the seed of thought had been planted. Next, Poirot sought out Marcus Hale, the doctoral student whose resentment had been evident the evening before. Hale's office was a small, crowded space. Papers and journals were stacked in haphazard towers, and the young man's eyes were red from lack of sleep. You were quite upset, monsieur, Poirot began. The previous evening. I was, Hale admitted, running his hands through his hair. Felton was unfair. He ignored my research and gave credit to others. He humiliated me in front of the committee. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Anger, Monsieur Hale, is often loud. But planning is silent. Did anyone suggest you act upon your resentment? Hale shook his head vehemently. No. I may have been angry, but I am not a killer. I left the building. I swear it. Poirot's eyes, grey and discerning, studied Hale's face. He noted the way the young man avoided certain words, the subtle tension in his jaw, the slight tremor of his hands. Not necessarily guilt, but something. Perhaps fear. Do you know about the grant? Poirot asked. Hale hesitated, then nodded. I know that my position on the project was precarious. If Felton had submitted the proposal as he intended, I might have been removed entirely. Poirot's fingers brushed his moustache. Ah. A motive, yes, but not necessarily the crime itself. Fear can speak more loudly than intent. By mid-afternoon, Poirot visited Professor Edwin Marsh. Marsh, seated in the dim corner of the library, radiated disdain. He did not rise when Poirot approached. Professor Marsh, Poirot began, you publicly criticized the Meridian project. Was that simply professional honesty, or for more personal disappointment? Marsh's thin lips pressed together. Felton's work undermines the integrity of research. I will not compromise my principles for money or recognition. And yet, Poirot said softly, you are human. Do principles always outweigh ambition? Marsh's eyes flashed, but he said nothing. Finally, Poirot spoke with Eleanor Price, the administrator. She was filing documents with meticulous attention, as if their order could prevent further chaos. You have access to the schedules, Poirot observed. You control the keys, the records of entry. You are a gatekeeper of this academic world. Price nodded. I ensure order. That is all. I do not concern myself with ambitions. Ambition is everywhere, mademoiselle, Poirot said. It manifests as subtle gestures, small deceptions, tiny maneuvers to elevate oneself. She glanced up briefly, her eyes steady. Everyone has ambition, Monsieur Poirot. Including you, I imagine. Poirot allowed himself a thin smile. But mine is always disciplined. By evening, Poirot had retraced the chain of events, mentally reconstructing the movements, the motivations, and the subtle tensions among the 5 individuals. Each had a reason to resent Felton. Each had benefited or could have benefited from shifts in the Meridian grant's distribution. Yet something remained elusive. He walked slowly through the quadrangle, observing the quiet order of the university grounds. Even in the stillness, subtle truths revealed themselves. A scuff on a step, a smear on the handle of a door, the shadow of a figure moving too quickly in a corridor, these small irregularities whispered secrets to those willing to see. Poirot paused beneath the clock tower, his eyes tracing the angles of the stones, the symmetry of the paths. The mind that plans carefully, he murmured, can always manipulate appearances. But no one, Inspector, can control everything. Not even the cleverest. He returned to his temporary quarters in the guest rooms of St. Aldwyn's, where tea awaited him. As he poured, he reflected on the day. Rivalries were evident. Motives were clear. Yet nothing confirmed the identity of the perpetrator. In fact, Poirot understood that the very clarity of each suspect's resentment could be deceptive. Jealousy, ambition, fear, they were tools the murderer could exploit, allowing attention to fall elsewhere while the true plan unfolded. Ah, he said softly, the more one knows, the more complicated it becomes. But I am patient. The mind reveals itself in time, just as the leaves reveal the season. In the quiet, Poirot began to chart a mental map of interactions, movements, and subtle inconsistencies. Each conversation offered clues, each hesitation a potential insight. He noted Winslow's controlled fury, Hale's impulsive agitation, Marsh's rigid disdain, Price's orderly detachment, and Brooke's polite concern. All of them were capable, in theory, of murder, but only one had orchestrated the final scene with the precision of intellect and the calm of deliberate purpose. Yet the revelation would not come today. Not yet. For now, Poirot allowed the university to settle into its uneasy rhythm, knowing that in the shadows of its corridors, truth waited patiently, imperceptible but inevitable. And as the autumn sun dipped low behind the stone towers, casting long shadows across the quadrangle, Poirot adjusted his cufflinks and whispered to himself, "Patience, mon ami. Soon, the mind will speak more clearly than any word." Chapter 5: The Locked Door Illusion. The morning after his thorough exploration of the Meridian Grant tensions, Hercule Poirot returned to the philosophy seminar room. The university staff had cleaned and preserved the scene as best they could, but he preferred to examine it personally, without interruption. He had learned, long ago, that the subtleties of crime often survived in what appeared to be nothing at all: the faint scuff of a shoe, the misalignment of a chair, the lingering odor of fear or sweat. Inspector Mills followed, notebook in hand, frowning as he entered. "You still think the door is the key, monsieur?" he asked. Poirot shook his head gently. "No, Inspector. It is a distraction. The locked door is like a locked mind, it reassures us, but it tells lies." He crouched to inspect the floor once more. The faint overlapping scuff marks he had noticed days before were still there, almost invisible beneath the polished wood. He traced the pattern carefully with a gloved finger. "Observe, Inspector," he said softly, "2 impressions. One heavier, one lighter. One deliberate, one incidental. One marks the place of the killer, the other the place of the manipulator." Mills frowned. 2 people. Or one person, acting with cunning in 2 parts. Poirot moved to the desk. He examined the arrangement of papers, the angle of the lamp, and the position of the now infamous brass paperweight. It had been used to strike Felton, but why leave it at the scene? Why not dispose of it? "Ah," Poirot murmured, "the murderer wishes the crime to be noticed, yet not understood. A paradox, OUI. Mills crossed his arms. "But why stage it like a locked room mystery?" Poirot straightened. "Because it is seductive. Humans are drawn to the impossible. It suggests cleverness and diverts suspicion from simplicity. But real cleverness is subtle." He turned to the door. "The lock itself is instructive. Observe the scratches, the slight misalignment. The door was locked, yes, but when?" Mills looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" "The scream," Poirot said, pacing slowly, "occurred later than the blow. The victim did not die when it seems. Someone staged the discovery after death, moving carefully to manipulate our perception." Inspector Mills frowned. "So, the time of death is earlier than we thought." "Exactment. And that is the crucial misdirection." Poirot's eye scanned the window. The latch was untouched, the glass intact. No forced entry. No sign of tampering. A clever killer indeed could stage a murder with no apparent intrusion, but the true ingenuity lay elsewhere. "The key, Inspector," Poirot explained, "is to separate appearance from reality. A closed room is not always closed. A scream is not always a cry of death. The human mind can be fooled easily when it is led to trust its assumptions." Poirot directed Mills to examine the clock once more. "The clock did not stop accidentally," Poirot said. "It was manipulated. A subtle pressure, a nudge, enough to freeze it. And yet the victim's watch, his own timepiece, tells a different story. Ah, how beautifully inconsistent! Mills scribbled furiously. So the killer wanted to confuse us with the clock and the scream. Poirot smiled faintly. Misoi. Misdirection, Inspector, is as vital in crime as in theatre. And in both, the audience often applauds the wrong performer. After this meticulous review, Poirot requested a reconstruction of the evening. The university porter and 2 staff members assisted, demonstrating who had moved where and when. Poirot observed quietly, noting every detail. Marcus Hale's demonstration was nervous. He entered the corridor, retraced his steps, and paused near the seminar room. Poirot observed the way Hale's gaze lingered on the door. Curious, Poirot whispered to Mills. He returns to the crime scene, yet he left before the actual blow. Or so he claims. Hale's scuff marks on the floor matched one set of impressions. Another set remained unexplained. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Dr. Winslow's route was precise. She passed the room but did not enter. Professor Marsh claimed he had remained in the library entirely. Only Eleanor Price's movements remained uncertain. Poirot requested she retrace her steps, quietly and without interruption. The result confirmed his suspicions. She passed the seminar room shortly after Felton's death, performing the action of locking the door and arranging the scene to mimic a suicide or accidental injury. "See, Inspector," Poirot said. "Orderly, discreet, invisible, but present." Most clever criminals rely not on strength, but on subtlety. Here is the subtlety of a mind trained to serve, to manipulate without drawing attention. Mills was visibly astonished. "Are you suggesting Eleanor Price is the killer?" Poirot shook his head gently. "Not the killer, no. The hand that staged the scene. The mind that planned the deception, that belongs elsewhere. But observe how she acts, she covers, she rearranges, she obeys. Her loyalty conceals, but also reveals, a crucial clue." Poirot returned to the desk, examining the brass paperweight again. He lifted it carefully, feeling its weight, noting the dents and scratches. The murder itself, he said, was simple. One blow. One strike. No frenzied struggle. The mind of the killer controlled both the action and its aftermath. And yet, the elegance of manipulation is in the details left to the unwitting accomplice. He moved toward the door and gestured at the corridor outside. "Observe, Inspector, the perfection of appearances. All 5 individuals who had motive and opportunity appear to have alibis. Yet one mind orchestrates. One mind acts in silence while others unknowingly support its plan." Poirot paused, hands clasped behind his back, eyes following the angles of the room and the light falling through the window. "Inspector, you see, a crime is not merely a violent act. It is choreography, performed upon the stage of human assumption. And in this performance, the most dangerous participant is the one who directs from behind the curtain." Mills exhaled slowly. "So, the locked door, the scream, the clock, they're all part of the act." "Exactly," Poirot said, tapping his moustache. "All designed to mislead, to charm, to create the illusion of impossibility. The truth, however, is always simpler. The victim died earlier. The door was locked later. The scream was staged to draw attention." Poirot's eyes softened as he surveyed the room. "And the beauty, Inspector, is that no detail is wasted. Every subtlety, every movement, every hesitated glance, all reveal the character of the mind behind the act. We must now study those minds closely. For the body no longer speaks, but the living tell tales in every gesture, every word, every silence." He straightened, smiling faintly. "And so, the investigation must move from mechanics to psychology. The locked door is an illusion. but the human mind never lies entirely. Outside, the autumn wind rustled the leaves along the stone paths. Poirot's sharp gaze followed their drifting pattern, noting symmetry and disorder alike. In the quiet, he whispered to himself, "Patience, mon ami. The mind that plans so carefully cannot remain unseen forever. And soon, the threads of deception will unravel, revealing the cleverness, the audacity, and the identity of the true murderer." And with that, Poirot left the room, confident that the subtle mechanics of the crime had been revealed. What remained was to uncover the personality capable of orchestrating such perfection, and the loyalty, fear, or ambition that enabled others to become unwitting accomplices in the illusion. Chapter 6: The Administrator's Silence. The corridors of St. Aldwyn's University were quieter than usual that morning, though not devoid of movement. Students passed with lowered heads, whispering to one another, and professors lingered near doorways, glancing cautiously at colleagues as if suspicion were a tangible presence. Hercule Poirot, however, moved with unhurried certainty. To the casual observer, he appeared merely contemplative, observing the patterns of the university as though it were a living organism. Yet beneath that calm, his mind worked tirelessly, assembling pieces of a puzzle that most had not even realized existed. He began his day with Eleanor Price. The departmental administrator was a woman of exacting precision. Her office was immaculate, every file in perfect alignment, every document noted and catalogued. Poirot noted how she worked, careful, deliberate, and, most importantly, unobtrusive. "Madam Price," he said gently, "you are the quietest participant in all of this." She glanced up, eyes steady. "I merely perform my duties, Monsieur Poirot." "Ah, yes. But consider, mademoiselle, that silence can conceal as much as it reveals." She raised an eyebrow. "You imply that I know more than I let on." Poirot smiled faintly. "Not imply. Observe. You were the one to lock the door, were you not?" Price's fingers paused on her pen. "I followed instructions," she admitted softly, "to ensure that nothing disturbed the scene until help arrived." "Ah," Poirot said, nodding. "A loyal hand. Invisible, discreet. Very useful in the orchestration of events. And yet, your loyalty reveals a great deal. To whom do you owe it?" She hesitated, then met his gaze. "To those who lead. I have always believed that order is paramount. I serve it, as best I can." Poirot leaned back. "And when a mind seeks control above all else, loyalty becomes malleable." The conversation concluded, and Poirot moved on, silently observing the subtle interactions between the staff and faculty. His next visit was to Professor Edwin Marsh, who sat in his dim office surrounded by philosophy texts. His disdain for the Meridian Project was evident in the tight line of his mouth and the furrowed brows. "Professor Marsh," Poirot began, "you publicly criticized Dr. Felton's work as flawed and misguided. Were these criticisms truly academic, or personal?" Marsh's voice was firm, almost cold. "Felton's methods were dishonest. I cannot respect deception, Monsieur Poirot." "And yet," Poirot said softly, "anger can be masked as virtue. You may believe you despise dishonesty, but sometimes it is ambition you cannot bear to see rewarded." Marsh's jaw tightened. He did not reply. "Observe, Inspector," Poirot later told Mills, "the mind that cloaks resentment in moral outrage is a mind capable of carefully considered action." From there, Poirot visited Dr. Clara Winslow. She was seated at her desk, meticulously reviewing experimental notes. "Dr. Winslow," Poirot said, "you have argued with Felton. Not merely disagreements of method, but heated disputes. Tell me, what was at stake for you personally?" Winslow's eyes sharpened. "Our research is delicate. Felton's changes could undermine entire experiments. I argued because the integrity of the work mattered, not personal ambition. Poirot studied her carefully. Yet, passion and intellect often dance closely. You speak of integrity, yes, but did fear play no part? Fear of diminished recognition? Fear of being overlooked? Winslow's hand twitched. I will not deny worry, she said quietly. But murder? Never. I left before anything happened. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Indeed. And yet fear, as we know, can lead others to act for you. Or against you. By midday, he sought out Marcus Hale. The young man appeared restless, pacing the stone corridors. His anger had been evident from the first meeting, yet now it seemed more controlled, though brittle, like a thin layer over boiling water. You were denied recognition, yes, Poirot said gently. And you returned that evening. Not for vengeance, but to retrieve something, correct? Hale nodded reluctantly. My notes. I wanted to review them before Felton submitted them as his own. And did you? Poirot asked softly. No. I left them. He was already gone. Poirot's eyes, calm but piercing, noted the subtle tension in Hale's fingers and jaw. Observe, Inspector, how guilt and fear intertwine in the young. He believes he is culpable merely for being angry. Such a mind is useful to the true planner. Easily misdirected. Finally, Poirot returned to Professor Lionel Brooke. Brooke, the Vice-Chancellor, received him in his office with an air of cultivated calm. Yet Poirot detected something beneath the surface, a carefulness that went beyond courtesy. Every gesture was precise, every word measured. Monsieur Poirot, Brooke began, it seems the investigation progresses slowly, but surely. Yes, Poirot replied, and I am most interested in the subtleties. Not the visible evidence, though it is instructive, but the invisible, the emotions, the loyalties, the quiet ambitions. Brooke smiled, faintly uneasy. You place great weight on observation of character. Ah, said Poirot, for the mind reveals itself more than any fingerprint. And the mind that commits murder leaves traces in subtle gestures, in hesitation, in the control, or lack thereof, or of others. Brooke's hands twitched imperceptibly, then smoothed themselves over the desk. Poirot noticed the movement, the tiny flicker of unease that betrayed more than words ever could. As the day wore on, Poirot reflected on the cumulative observations. Eleanor Price was loyal, meticulous, and cautious. Dr. Winslow was passionate and intelligent, her anger restrained but visible. Marcus Hale was young, impulsive, and vulnerable to suggestion. Professor Marsh was principled, or so he believed, but bitterness lingered beneath his rigor. Brooke, the polished administrator, maintained his calm with a precision that seemed almost unnatural. Each had motive, opportunity, and the ability to influence events, whether directly or indirectly. Each could have committed murder, or assisted in its careful orchestration. Yet Poirot noted a distinction. One mind was the architect. The others, unwitting participants, had contributed to the illusion without knowing it. Their fears, loyalties, and ambitions had been manipulated, turning their ordinary traits into instruments of concealment. He spent the evening in quiet reflection, reviewing his mental notes, comparing gestures, contradictions, and inconsistencies. He imagined the paths each suspect had taken, their potential interactions, their opportunities. Observe, Poirot whispered to himself, the power of subtlety. One mind directs, one hand executes, and yet all appear innocent. The perfection lies not in brute strength, but in understanding the hearts of others. As night fell and the shadows of the university grew long, Poirot finally set his cane aside and reclined in his chair. The mechanisms of the crime had been exposed in part, the locked door, the staged scream, the manipulated clock. Now, the human elements required examination, fear, ambition, loyalty, and deception. In the silence, Poirot reflected on what he had learned. The university had revealed its undercurrents, the tensions beneath the civility, and the quiet manipulations of character. One truth was clear: the murderer was among them, yet hidden behind loyalty, fear, or the very skill with which they concealed themselves. And soon, Poirot whispered, the mind that plans with such precision will reveal itself. For no deception, however elegant, can withstand the patient observation of the human intellect. With that, he closed his notebook and prepared for the next day, a day that would bring him closer to understanding not just who had killed Dr. Felton, but why. Chapter 7: Order and Control. The early morning sun cast long, golden beams across the quadrangle of St. Aldwyn's University. Autumn leaves skittered along the stone paths, caught in gentle draughts, their movement oddly symmetrical. To any observer, the day might have appeared calm, yet beneath the surface, tension simmered. Scholars walked hurriedly to lectures, whispering in tight clusters, staff lingered in doorways, their eyes darting cautiously toward colleagues. And in the midst of it all, Hercule Poirot moved with unhurried certainty, as if he alone could perceive the patterns invisible to others. He began by observing Professor Lionel Brooke. The Vice-Chancellor was conducting a meeting with his department heads, his voice measured, his gestures polished. To the casual eye, he was the epitome of authority and composure. Yet Poirot, ever attentive, noted small inconsistencies, the slight tightening of Brooke's jaw when Dr. Winslow questioned the schedule of the Meridian project, the fleeting glance toward the clock when a discussion touched upon Felton's recent changes, the almost imperceptible clench of his fist beneath the table when a subordinate suggested a delay in research deadlines. "Ah," Poirot murmured to Inspector Mills, who shadowed him discreetly, "observe the mask of authority. It is well practiced, but even the most careful facade cracks under subtle pressure." Mills nodded, though his brow furrowed. "You think he's hiding something?" "Mais oui, Inspector. But not merely hiding, orchestrating." Poirot moved silently through the corridors, observing Dr. Clara Winslow next. She was supervising a small experiment, directing students with precise instructions. Her focus was absolute, yet when she believed herself unobserved, her eyes flicked repeatedly toward the philosophy building, toward the door behind which Felton had met his death. Poirot noted her restrained tension, the careful control of her emotions, the slight twitch of a hand, the way she bit her lip at moments of distraction. "Fear," Poirot said softly, "and anger, carefully controlled. Very revealing, indeed." He spent the late morning examining Marcus Hale. The young doctoral student moved with restless energy, constantly adjusting papers, pacing, reviewing his notes, and occasionally glancing toward his supervisor, Brooke. Poirot observed how easily Hale could be unsettled. A careless word or a pointed question made him flinch or shift uneasily. A mind so malleable, Poirot whispered, can be manipulated without effort. Observe how he reacts not to facts, but to suggestion and implication. Professor Marsh, on the other hand, displayed rigidity. He spent the morning in the library, moving from shelf to shelf, muttering under his breath about academic integrity and the moral decay of modern research. Poirot watched the thin line of bitterness in his expression, noting how principle had hardened into judgment. The philosopher's disdain for Felton's methods remained constant, yet Poirot suspected that the intensity of his moral certainty might make him blind to manipulation. It was Eleanor Price, however, who fascinated Poirot most. The administrator moved with quiet efficiency, yet her steps were precise, her eyes attentive, and her hands meticulous in their work. He watched her reorganize schedules, check keys, and manage access to restricted areas. She was an invisible presence, yet one whose careful attention made her indispensable. Poirot reflected on how she had orchestrated the appearance of the crime scene, locking the door, arranging objects, ensuring that nothing seemed amiss. "Ah," he murmured to Mills, "the perfect accomplice, though perhaps unwitting. Loyalty and fear can create instruments of deception, and she wields hers with elegance. By midday, Poirot requested a private conversation with all 5 individuals. He gathered them in the great hall, a space of high ceilings, polished stone floors, and imposing portraits of university founders. The room, usually a place of ceremony and civility, seemed charged with an unspoken tension. Poirot stood before them, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes moving deliberately from one person to another. Poirot walked slowly down the line. The true planner, he said, understands both mechanism and psychology. They know how others act under fear, how they obey without question, how loyalty can be exploited. And they act quietly, ensuring that suspicion falls elsewhere. He turned, pointing toward Brooke. And in our midst, the one who desires control above all, who is accustomed to directing the motions of others, is not the young student, not the passionate researcher, not the moralist philosopher, nor even the loyal administrator, though she assisted, unknowingly. The mind of order, of control, resides elsewhere. Brooke's hand twitched at his side. Poirot's gaze met his. The one who orchestrated events, Poirot continued, did so not out of rage, not out of passion, but out of necessity, the need to control outcomes, to preserve the appearance of order, to direct the consequences of ambition and fear. Such a mind plans with precision, leaves subtle clues, and manipulates the actors around it to perform without knowing. The room remained silent. The students and staff present sensed the weight of Poirot's words. Each realized, in some quiet corner of the mind, that their own actions had been observed, measured, and interpreted. Poirot's eye swept over the group again. And so, we understand the mechanics, the psychological interplay, the loyalties and fears. But knowing how the crime was committed is not enough. One must know why. One must understand the mind that demanded such control and orchestrated events so perfectly. And it is this mind, he said, pausing to let the tension thicken, that we shall soon reveal. He straightened, adjusting his cufflinks with careful precision. Patience, Miss Amos. The human mind cannot conceal itself indefinitely. The truth, though delayed, approaches steadily. And when it arrives, every action, every hesitation, every expression will fall into its rightful place. As the assembly dispersed, Poirot walked alone through the corridors of St. Aldwyn's, his steps measured, his eyes observing. Outside, the autumn wind stirred leaves in patterns that were at once random and symmetrical. He paused beneath a window through which the sunlight streamed. Ah, the human heart, he murmured, so predictable in its illusions, yet so subtle in its truth. Soon, the mind that orchestrated this drama will no longer hide behind loyalty, fear, or ambition. And then, then, the order will be revealed, as it always must be. The day ended with a quiet certainty for Poirot. The solution lay not merely in examining evidence, but in understanding the mind that controlled it. The threads of manipulation, ambition, and loyalty were converging. And soon, the truth would no longer be elusive. Chapter 8, The Mind Revealed. The great hall of St. Aldwyn's University was unusually silent that evening. Outside, the late autumn wind swept through the quadrangle, rattling fallen leaves against the stone walls. Inside, the small gathering consisted of the Vice-Chancellor, the 4 faculty members, the doctoral student, the administrator, Inspector Mills, and, of course, Hercule Poirot himself. The sense of anticipation was tangible, whispers of curiosity and unease lingered in the air, yet no one dared break the stillness. Poirot stood before them, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression serene yet commanding. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, we have spent many days examining the death of Dr. Adrian Felton. We have discussed motives, observed actions, and noted the subtle interplay of loyalty, ambition, and fear. Today, we shall speak of truths, truths that cannot be ignored, truths revealed not by what was seen, but by what was felt and what was overlooked. He gestured gently toward the group. Let us begin with the events of that evening. Dr. Felton did not die at the moment we believed. The scream that echoed through the corridors was staged, meant to mislead and distract. The door, locked from within, was secured after the murder. And the clock, stopped at 6:40, was manipulated to suggest a later hour than reality. I shifted nervously. Poirot's calm voice contrasted sharply with the tension in the room. Now, he continued, the question arises, who possessed both the motive and the understanding to orchestrate such precision? He turned slowly to the Vice-Chancellor, Professor Lionel Brooke. Monsieur Brooke, you are a man accustomed to control, to managing personalities, to directing events to achieve the desired outcome. Your position grants influence over all others in this institution. Brooke's hand twitched slightly. Monsieur Poirot, you insinuate. Poirot raised a delicate finger, silencing him. I insinuate nothing. Observation does not accuse. It reveals. Observe the patterns, Miss Amis. Dr. Winslow was passionate, but her movements were impulsive. Marcus Hale acted from fear and frustration, but his actions lacked planning. Professor Marsh possessed moral rigidity, but not cunning. And Eleanor Price, though instrumental in staging the scene, acted from loyalty, not initiative. All were pieces, not architects. He paused, letting the words sink in. The mind behind the orchestration understood each of these individuals as instruments. Each action was guided, each hesitation anticipated. And who, I ask, benefits from controlling the outcome of the Meridian Grant, directing attention away from oneself, and ensuring that suspicion falls elsewhere? A low murmur passed through the group. Brooke's posture stiffened. Poirot's gaze lingered, unflinching. It is a mind that values order above all. That trusts loyalty to execute its plans while remaining unseen. That manipulates the predictable patterns of fear, ambition, and habit. And that mind belongs to one person. He turned finally, his eyes sharp, to the Vice-Chancellor. Monsieur Lionel Brooke. Brooke's composure faltered slightly. You cannot. Poirot smiled gently. Ah, but it is not a matter of conjecture. Observe the evidence, combined with human behavior. Dr. Felton's death occurred before the scream. The door was locked afterwards. Eleanor Price acted dutifully, believing she was preserving order. Marcus Hale's nervous return to the corridor, Dr. Winslow's anxious glances toward the building, Professor Marsh's preoccupation with principle, all these were anticipated, manipulated, directed. And who has the experience, the authority, and the understanding to conduct such orchestration? You, Monsieur Brooke. Brooke's lips pressed together. You have no proof. Circumstantial observation is not evidence. Poirot inclined his head. Ah, but sometimes, the mind is the evidence. Let us consider the Meridian Grant. Dr. Felton sought to redistribute allocations, threatening your vision for the department. Your ambition is not of greed, but of order. You sought to correct the imbalance. To preserve the department's hierarchy and ensure that chaos did not reign. And in that moment, you acted. Inspector Mills stepped forward. Are you saying he murdered Felton to protect the grant? Poirot's gaze remained fixed on Brooke. Not merely to protect it, Inspector. To control the outcome entirely. The brilliance of the plan lies in directing the hands of others without their knowledge. Eleanor Price locks the door. Hale believes himself implicated but remains unaware. Winslow's passion distracts attention. Marsh's disdain misleads suspicion. All serve the design, unknowingly. Brooke's face had gone pale. And what of the paperweight? Poirot held up the brass object with care. An instrument chosen for precision and symbolic authority. Heavy enough to deliver the fatal blow, yet familiar, an emblem of the institution itself. and left behind to create illusion, to reinforce the narrative of a sudden, impossible event. He paced slowly before the group. Consider also the clock. A simple manipulation, yet effective. The perception of time altered, so that witnesses, even the most observant, are deceived. And the scream, staged to suggest immediacy, directing the attention of those present to the wrong moment. Brooke's composure broke. His hands twitched. Yes, I did it. But it was necessary. Felton, he would have destroyed the order I have worked to preserve. Poirot nodded calmly. Necessary in your mind, perhaps. Yet murder remains a choice, monsieur. And every choice leaves traces, not only in evidence, but in the reactions of others. The loyalty of Price, the fears of Hale, the impulsiveness of Winslow, the rigidity of Marsh, all reveal the hand that guides them. And that hand is yours. A hush fell over the hall. Eleanor Price's face was pale, but she did not speak. Her loyalty had been manipulated, yet her actions had been crucial in revealing the orchestration. Poirot continued, the crime was not impulsive. It was deliberate. Controlled. Executed with the understanding that others would act according to their predictable traits. And that is why suspicion initially fell elsewhere. Yet the truth is patient. The mind that plans so meticulously cannot conceal itself indefinitely. He turned to Inspector Mills. Monsieur l'Inspector, the evidence of motive, opportunity, psychological manipulation, and orchestration is sufficient. The fingerprints, while absent, are not always necessary when the mind itself confesses through actions and patterns. Brooke's shoulders slumped. He lowered his eyes. I only wanted order, he whispered. I never intended to create so much fear. Poirot approached, his voice gentle. But the consequences of action are not always within the control of the actor, Monsieur Brooke. You manipulated the scene, you guided the participants, and you created the illusion of impossibility. But the human heart, and the eyes that observe it, reveal everything in the end. Inspector Mills nodded, stepping forward to place Brooke under arrest. The Vice-Chancellor offered no resistance, finally understanding that the web he had woven could not withstand the patient observation of the human mind. Poirot turned to the remaining faculty and staff. Let this be a lesson: intelligence and ambition, while powerful, must always be tempered by morality. The mind that seeks to control everything inevitably exposes itself through the very details it believes it can command. He then addressed Eleanor Price, who had remained composed throughout. You acted dutifully, mademoiselle, and your loyalty, though exploited, was invaluable. The lesson is that even the smallest hand can play a significant part, for good or ill. Marcus Hale exhaled deeply. I never imagined any of this. I thought. You believed, mon ami, that anger alone could implicate you, Poirot said kindly. But fear and emotion can mislead the observer. That is why one must always look carefully, and with patience, to the mind behind the act. Dr. Winslow and Professor Marsh exchanged glances, each silently acknowledging the subtle power of the investigation. Poirot looked around the hall once more. The mechanics of the crime, locked door, staged scream, manipulated clock, were impressive. But the human element, the understanding of fear, loyalty, and ambition, was the true instrument. And it is through this lens that the murderer is revealed, as it always must be. As the group dispersed, Poirot lingered beneath the towering windows, watching the last rays of the sun illuminate the stone walls. He whispered softly to himself, order restored, justice served, and the human mind, once again, proves to be the most revealing instrument of all. Inspector Mills approached. Remarkable, Poirot. You saw what no one else could. Poirot smiled faintly, adjusting his cufflinks. Inspector, it is not merely observation. It is understanding. The mind is the final clue, the ultimate evidence, and the patient observer can always see the truth hidden beneath layers of deception. And so, with the culprit revealed, the university began the slow process of returning to its routine, its ancient walls silently bearing witness to ambition, fear, and the extraordinary precision of Hercule Poirot's intellect.